Hello again everyone and welcome back to the Underground. Today I wanted to offer a bit of a peek behind the curtain and talk about a project that we're currently working on. I don't usually like releasing unfinished work, but this one requires a bit of user participation to be effective, so I thought I would get it out in the world now and try it out. So please keep in mind that this plan is a bit rough around the edges at the moment, but it will be a lot more polished in due time. This project is the GhostNet. So what is the GhostNet? This is a multi-layered communications plan to allow radio operators to communicate with each other efficiently using a variety of data modes. This plan is going to seem really complicated at first, but it's really a simple way to create global communications networks in as simple of a way as possible. Hopefully, this will encourage users to begin using radio more in their daily lives, not just for practice, but for real-world information exchange. We cannot hope to replace internet-based communications on the radio, but hopefully we can start siphoning off some of that so that people can start getting, daily news headlines, local events happening in their area, basic communications, stuff like that. People can start relying on the internet less, even though we know that radios can't totally replace the internet. From our end here, we cannot possibly reinvent the wheel, right? We're not trying to replace or step on anybody's toes when it comes to communications plans, because there's a lot of comm plans out there already. But we can provide our version of a standard common plan for everyone to use. Over time, this plan is going to change, but it's a good start for now. Now, I can already feel some eyes glazing over anytime radio stuff is mentioned. I really get it. But I would urge those of you who are not super interested in radio stuff to stick with me, because this GhostNet is really for people like you. We're not building this with the radio operator in mind. We're building this with the non-radio operator in mind. So don't be turned off if something goes over your head right now. I promise you, we will be getting back to going over the basics in due time. I just thought that in the interest of time and how crazy things are going in the world, we should probably get this plan out there, show how useful it is, and then use that as incentive to get non-radio folks involved. So here's how we've got this set up so far. A lot of the stuff that we're going to talk about today relies on JS8 call, because it is just something that is really, really easy for people to use, and I think that the JS8 call features of this plan are going to be used more than anything else, but we're, again, bringing other data modes into this as well. That's like the bare minimum. If all you want to do is just bounce into JS8 call, ping a couple of people, see what's up, maybe exchange a couple of headlines, and then dip out, that's fine. After the JS8 call window, we've got other kinds of transmission modes. You can send WinLink, you can send news reports via RTTY, and stuff like that. All of this takes place roughly once a week. So depending on your skill level, if you, again, just wanted to do some JS8 call work, that's all this is. You can tune in once a week to JS8 call for your region and be good. If you want to do some more advanced stuff, or you link up with someone on JS8 call, maybe a new contact, someone who you haven't talked with before, and you want to send them an email, you can link up on JS8 call, and then after that comm window's over, you'll have a chance to send them an email. When it comes to talking to other continents, we really want to keep the low power operator in mind, the QRP operator, the guy that's got just a small QRP radio. A lot of developmental radios are coming out that are very, very cheap. They're very, very cheap transceivers, and they work best on data modes in, QRP operations kind of thing. So we want to keep those people in mind. And because of that, it's going to be really hard to maintain consistent contact between, say, North America and Europe any time of day for the QRP operator. If you've got 100 watts to blast out, fine, you can make contact with Europe on JS8 call very easily at any time of day, pretty much. But in order to make the maximum chance of success and to kind of get everybody on the same page, I think the real power here is just allotting like an hour or two during the times when long-distance communications are most likely to be successful for the QRP operator. We're calling these meetups data bridges, and these are all going to be on Saturday. So if you want to tune in, you can tune in on Thursdays, which are when our JS8 call nets are, and you can also tune in on Saturday at varying times of day, depending on which continent you want to talk to. I know this may seem a little bit complicated, so let me walk through how a GhostNet meeting will work. The first thing you can do is download the free PDF document, the comm plan itself, and you can print it out, laminate it, or just have it handy for reference. Once you have the guide in hand, or really easy to reference, you can find the people that you want to talk to. If you want to talk to just your region, then you can find the page for that. And if you want to talk to another region, you can find the page for that, and then use those parameters and wait until the comm window, and then try to make your communication, depending on what kind of communication you're trying to do. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details of this plan, let's talk about some of the benefits, some of the pros to using this kind of system. For one, it's equipment friendly. It's a solid plan for allowing users to have a scheduled time for linking up with locals and distant contacts, whoever you wanted to talk to. Switching from 20 meters to 40 meters is not as easy for users with single band antennas, so having two different kind of plans, one for local comms and one for like long range DX kind of stuff, this allows for users to use the gear that they have more efficiently. I know that if I'm using a single band antenna, I'm going to probably just set up for local communications, local stuff on 40 meters, and just call it a day, right? I'm not going to go through the effort of setting up an entirely separate antenna just to get some DX work in. If I'm going to do that, I'm going to have one radio session a week, out of my busy schedule to set up for long range stuff. So this also means that users can pick and choose how they want to participate based on the time that they have. If they only want to check in on JS8 call, fantastic. You can do that and then dip out. If you only need to send a few emails to a buddy, fine. You can link up during the time period and do it that way. If you want to schedule like a teleconference or some kind of phone call over ALE, there's room for that as well. Speaking of more advanced stuff like ALE, users of all experience levels can be involved. JS8 call is what we would consider to be the absolute baseline for everyone on HF radio to be able to run. If you can get your gear working with JS8 call, or even just the original like FT8, you can do pretty much everything with regards to data modes. More advanced users who have multi-band antennas and compatible radios can take advantage of the cutting edge of civilian HF radio, automatic link establishment programs like ION 2G. ALE, while best served to leave running 24/7, is still a relatively new addition to ham radio, so picking a specific comm window allows users to test their gear and be sure that others are indeed listening. But more on ALE a bit later, it's quite complicated. There's also room for variation. Anyone can take this template and create their own localized GhostNet. It's easy to copy the framework. If the specific times don't work for you or your group, you can always adjust things to be a little bit more personalized. And finally, like I mentioned, it is created with busy people in mind. For some people, working with radios is a joyful hobby, but for others, it's an undesirable chore. Since we are trying to use radio as a tool to help us stay connected in these troubling times, we want to make this whole system as easy as possible. Some things can't be helped, like band conditions. Sometimes you might have to stay up late into the night to send an email around the world, or to get news from your local area. But we really want to reduce the impact that radio operations have on our busy lives. Some people cannot dedicate an hour every day for this, but an hour a week is reasonable. Other people who have a bit more flexibility might be able to make 3 or 4 comm windows per week, and stay a bit more connected with other regions around the world. Whatever you want to do, the plan hopefully has something for you. At the minimum, if something is going down, some world event is happening that you want to know about, I guarantee you somebody's going to be on the GhostNet talking about it. Now, with all of that in mind, let's jump over to the GhostNet guide and go over some of the details. So right here on the overview page, we've got basically what I've mentioned already. We've got the core parts of the program kind of highlighted. Weekly JS8 call nets based on the region you're in on 40 meters. We've also got data bridges on 20 meters or sometimes 80 meters depending on the distance that we're trying to make for more long-range stuff, and those are going to be on Saturdays. We've also got receive-only options for those who just want to decode RTTY and just want to listen in via JS8 call. This is why we've been talking about receive-only options lately. And for users that are a little bit more capable, have a little bit more equipment to kind of spare for it, we've got ION 2G ALE networks for kind of what we're calling right now communications. That's just due to how ALE works. There's still a comm window for it. You could leave all of this stuff running 24/7 if you wanted to, but for right now we're just kind of sticking to specific comm windows just to kind of reduce the burden on the average user. Now, right here on the first page, I wanted to address kind of a concern that a lot of people might have, which is, what about my Baofeng? What about my analog VHF UHF handheld radio? For right now, I'm sorry to say that these radios don't really have a place in this specific comm plan. I'm working on a separate comm plan to take into account line-of-sight communications. This whole GhostNet is really about beyond line-of-sight communications, being able to talk to people that are not in your, say, local area. When I say local on HF radio, I mean within the same state as you. Whereas with VHF and UHF radios, which need to have line of sight to function, these radios are going to be really, really difficult to implement into a plan. Like, I can tell you, go to this frequency at this time of day, and the GhostNet will be active. But I can guarantee you we'll have thousands of people around the country screaming into their Baofangs, and they're not going to hear anybody because they're just not close enough to anybody to make it work. But fear not, we're going to work with what we have, right? So we're going to be creating a whole separate plan, or some kind of operating procedure, I guess, for what people have, like Baofangs and stuff. So don't think that we're neglecting these for now. This is really just more of a strategic kind of thing, top level, wave tops kind of thing for now. Moving on to the second page, we've got kind of, again, some more concepts kind of laid out and talking more about how we've got mostly 40-meter networks on JS8 call and WinLink and stuff like that, but we've also got data bridges for more long-range communications. Again, all of this stuff can be done 24 hours a day. If you have the power, you don't need to wait for a comm window. The only reason that the comm window exists is to get kind of everybody on the same page at the same time and increase the chances for a contact to be made. I can tell you that, sitting here at my desk most of the time, I've got JS8 call running in the background, just kind of listening to see what's out there. And if I see something, hey, maybe I want to make contact with somebody. But it's just going to be very, very sparse. Whereas if you have a specific, an hour a week to dedicate to it, people can actually do that. That's something that's feasible for people to do. Same thing with data bridges. It just makes it a little bit easier for people to get all of their gear set up for a long-range transmission, if they've got a very small, low-powered rig. Moving on down to emergency C2 nodes, we're kind of keeping in mind a lot of the stuff that we've learned so far about, like, warlord comms, right? A cool term that's come out lately. We want to be able to have capabilities when it's a very desperate situation, right? I think it's very hard to assume that people are going to be able to hop on this GhostNet when, their house is burned down or something like that. But we want to make sure that that's a possibility if people are able to do it. So these are just some thoughts on setting up emergency, like, command and control nodes or like an emergency talk when the situation is quite desperate. Again, this might change as I figure out better ways of rewording stuff. But moving on down to the survivability page on the reverse side of that one, this kind of points out some of the stuff that we have to give up if we're looking for survivability. I know that a lot of hams are going to look at this and say, well, this is just a simple comm plan, right? This is really nothing new. And that's true. There's really nothing that's majorly new here, right? The only major difference here is that this is not being run or associated with any kind of agency, right? This is just a plan for people to use without being tied to a reporting agency. We've already learned, unfortunately, throughout a few disasters that have happened lately, how radios have become kind of weaponized to some degree regarding how they've been told to shut down or how they've not been allowed to turn on repeaters or stuff like that. And, the traditional ham role of being involved with stuff like Ares or Mars, well, we're finding out that it's gotten complicated now. It's not just as simple as a crisis happens and people show up to use their radios for good anymore, because there's a lot of agencies that don't want that to happen, unfortunately. So again, this page just kind of highlights some of the problems that we're going to be dealing with as we're trying to create something that is more survivable than us here. Nobody's going to live forever, and we want to make sure that this plan can serve as a good guide for anyone out there, regardless of what targeting may occur. Sort of along those same lines, we've got kind of an architecture of privacy set up. Like this GhostNet here can fill a lot of different roles. And here at the bottom of this page, I've got kind of like the circles of trust kind of laid out as they pertain to like radio communications. I think most people are going to have a trusted sphere of people like that they share a house with, people that you live with, immediate family, stuff like that. Then you've got like a semi-trusted sphere of maybe like co-workers that you don't know super well. They know your real name and they may know your phone number, but they don't know like your social security number or something like that. And then you've got your public sphere of just total random strangers that you may contact. Now, of course, ham radio a lot of times is going to be in the public sphere, right? Because call signs are very public, and you can look up anybody's legit call sign due to the FCC not allowing anybody to have any sort of privacy whatsoever. So we've got to keep this in mind. And as we can see here, the kind of purple icons show where the GhostNet can really be plugged into any one of these, depending on how the situation goes. Technically, as long as the FCC exists, JS8 call is not going to be private. However, if something happens and the FCC is no longer a concern anymore, then we can actually use it. We can actually use it in very alternative ways. I'll just say that. So again, the GhostNet here is kind of a multi-layered thing where you can use it however you want to. You can use it in amongst people that you know, people that you don't know, and people that you sort of know, right? So there's many different ways of using the GhostNet. Using the umbrella of the GhostNet to kind of get your stuff done, right? So up next, I've got kind of a what's the point page, which is meant to sort of drive home some of these points, just in case people aren't picking up what I'm putting down, if you know what I mean. But the key takeaway for this page is that, hey, things are pretty freaking serious now, and there's a lot of people that realize this, and they're getting invested in radios now that HF technology is getting a lot cheaper. You can get a lot of, developmental transceivers for very, very cheap. And you can get on HF radio and work some data modes using very little power and be very difficult to direction find. And because of this, we've got to do better. We cannot use like a prepper frequency plan from the 1990s. We've got to do better. Voice comms, as far as I'm concerned, are very much a kind of like a dying art. I don't want to discount them entirely because there's just sometimes you cannot beat a human talking to another human being. Using verbal speech to get a point across, right? There's just no way to replicate that in some situations. However, for 90% of all communications on Earth can be done with text, right? So data modes are kind of the way forward, and this page kind of hopefully outlines that. Next up, we have our data bridge overview, and again, this page is kind of unfinished because we've got 4 data bridges right now, but there will probably be more added as people around the globe get interested. The reason for breaking things out this way and not just having a 24-hour radio bridge is because, again, low-power operators need the best chance of success. If they're going to try to make contact with somebody, they need to dang well know somebody's going to be listening during that time frame. So, if you're trying to talk from North America to Europe, here's kind of an overview of how to do it. Same with Europe to Australia, and Australia to the South Pacific, and North America to Australia. That's going to be probably the hardest one to make happen. As sort of a side note, the extra data bridge there for Australia to the South Pacific, this is me kind of getting ahead of the curve with regards to geopolitical issues that may be taking place in the Pacific theater, if you know what I mean. Australia is kind of the front line when it comes to information exchange throughout the South Pacific. If a prolonged conflict were to break out between China and Taiwan or something like that, some kind of situation in the South Pacific, Australia is going to be mightily concerned about that, understandably so. With that in mind, I've created a whole data bridge taking into account the fact that the South Pacific is a pretty big region on the Earth, and I think that they need their own data bridge for Australians to communicate with, say, like the Philippines or something like that. They need that dedicated data bridge. We're kind of front-loading the effort now to kind of get that out of the way, right? So, moving on down, we've got the GhostNet schedule at a glance, which is for Thursday and Saturday. Again, we've got Thursday are the local 40-meter nets, and Saturday are the long-range data bridges. So if you've got some spare time on a Thursday or Saturday, you can check the time and maybe hit one of these comm windows. Anybody who's capable can join into any of these comm windows if they want to make some communications, right? Maybe even service some relays. I don't know, during the long range hauls, people can kind of set up the things that they want to do. So yeah, this is just a good way to kind of look and see at a glance what time of day it is, and if you've got some spare time. Again, the times for these specific windows may change. We're still trying to figure out if there are any other larger nets or some kind of random data bursts that are going to go through and make it really hard to send communications during these time frames. So again, I can only look at things from my very small part of the world. Most of the people who've tested this out for us already are here in the United States or in North America. So trying to communicate around the world is a little bit difficult, especially when we try to work our comm windows around interference, right? So just keep in mind that we may have to shift these communications windows based on interference or other nets or something like that. So just remember that as we move forward. Up next, we get to the GhostNet North America page. Now this, if there's one page you're going to print out at home, this should be the page, this and the reverse side of it, because this outlines what's going to go on every Thursday night and at what times. So as we can see here, the top layer in the green, we've got the JS8 call window. Note that it is not on the main JS8 call frequency. This is on an alternative frequency. You don't have to use JS8 call on the main JS8 call calling frequencies. So we've shifted it off of the main calling frequencies because it's probably going to generate a lot of traffic, and we don't want to step on anybody's toes, right? So this is what you're going to want to go for, 7.105 for now. Again, this may change, but one of the cool things about JS8 Call in particular, and one of the reasons why JS8 Call, it seems like a simple program, but it is such a powerful group messaging tool, is that it allows you to create groups using the @ symbol and then a group name, which means I can hop on JS8 Call at this frequency during this time window and click, put like @GhostNet in my message, and anybody who is following that tag will get an alert on their screen. This makes it super easy to weed out any other communications that are not part of GhostNet stuff. And more importantly, if you have a subgroup, so like you wanted to have a GhostNet for your state or for your country or for your region, depending on where you're at in the world, you could absolutely do that. And you would only get notifications if somebody is pinging you. Again, if we're going to go big with this, we need to prepare for potentially thousands of people to be on GhostNet at the same time. Now, JS8 Call, by its very nature, makes it very easy to separate out communications and make sure that nobody is stepping on somebody else. But for those of you who are receiving only, it makes it easy for you to say, all right, this guy is in this state, this guy's talking about this event in this region. It makes it very, very easy so that you're not just on, one channel. You're able to differentiate out and have, if your antenna is good enough, or if you're using a good enough web SDR, you can hear a lot of different states going at it and sharing information all at the exact same time without stepping on anybody. That is awesome because you can have multiple news reports from multiple areas being put out. A lot of people talking about local events, battle tracking stuff, and all kinds of cool stuff, and nobody's really stepping on each other. So that's a really great way to use the organizational features within JS8 Call to monitor multiple networks. To keep things simple, for the next half hour in this comm window is going to be for WinLink peer-to-peer. As you guys know, I've mentioned it many, many times. WinLink, I am not a fan of when using the WinLink telnet. I just personally don't like sending an email through someone else's server because I think that, as WinLink has certain benefits to it, I think the reason that they set things up that way is so that WinLink can serve as a way to get a message outside of like a power outage zone to an area that has power and then use that to send an email using the regular internet. I'm just not a fan of that. I don't like the way the architecture is set up, and this is just my own personal preference. But anybody with any kind of power whatsoever can say, you know what, this email does not get to go through the internet, so they can shut that down based on call sign alone. I don't want to have that potential, so peer-to-peer is kind of the way forward. Using WinLink to send an email from one computer and radio to another computer and radio with no infrastructure in between. As we all know, if you don't own the wires, you don't own the communications. And if you're using someone else's infrastructure, such as a WinLink node, that's not a good way to set up emergency communications, in my opinion. You can use it as much as you want, fine. If it works, it works. But don't put all your eggs in one basket. So we've got the WinLink peer-to-peer frequency listed. Now again, one person, or rather two people, are going to be using this frequency to conduct handshakes and send peer-to-peer messages. So this is just like the main frequency for it. I don't foresee this getting a whole lot of use. but maybe it would. I don't know. I've made it the same as the JS8 call window so that hopefully you can actually see it in the heartbeat section, see a little bit of bleed over there in the heartbeat section of JS8 call to see, oh, someone is now sending a WinLink message. You may step on a few heartbeats here and there, but it's a good way for people who might stay on JS8 call for like a whole hour, you know? A lot of people don't want to stay on JS8 call for just 30 minutes. They might want to dedicate an hour to it. But if they see a WinLink message being sent in their JS8 call waterfall, they might say, hey, let me go check that out and see who's sending that email. So that's kind of the reason for keeping the same frequency. Moving down to the next window, which is RTTY, radio teletype, right? The old school classic. I'm going to have probably several videos talking specifically about RTTY, but RTTY is a fantastic mode. It's one of the, I think it is technically the first digital radio mode. Maybe I'm wrong on that. But anyway, this is a 30-minute time frame for users to gain experience with RTTY. In due time, I would hope that the community really takes this and runs with it, because right now RTTY is basically dead except for contesting. I envision a day in the future when the average person out there can turn on a receiver of some sort and decode RTTY news reports regularly. Like they can tune in like a submarine in the Atlantic during World War II and get the news headlines from around the world. I think that would be super, super cool. Like I've mentioned before, RTTY is absolutely perfect for sending out our wire reports. Literally the only thing holding me back from doing that is the legality. But the technology works. It's easy to do. But the FCC's regulations on what constitutes broadcasting versus amateur use, and the fact that there is zero way of legally transmitting without eliminating privacy using a licensed call sign, both of these reasons are why we're not transmitting wire reports on RTTY just yet. But hey, if the missiles start flying and we don't have to worry about the FCC or sad hams anymore, you know where I'll be. And finally, the last window is going to be just a hopefully mostly silent window, just in case somebody has some kind of emergency, right? Like I mentioned before, I don't want to rely on voice so much at all, because this just turns into a rag chewing session, and the GhostNet's not about that. We're about information exchange. So if somebody has an emergency or needs to make some kind of communication or relay something, you can't beat human voice for getting that communication across. But we don't want to rely on it as like a crutch or be potentially identified by it, right? So we want to allow for its usage, and we don't want to discount it, right? Because a lot of people out there are capable of simple voice transmissions on HF radio, but we don't want it to be a main thing. So we've allowed a frequency and a comm window for that, just in case it's needed. And on the back side of this page, we have the data bridges. So if you are in North America, these are the two data bridges that you can use. Depending on the time of day, they're kind of laid out very, very similar. So we've got basically just a simple JS8 callnet and an ION 2G ALE comm window if you wanted to use that. A whole hour for JS8 and a whole hour for ALE if you had that capability. Again, ALE is going to make a lot of this plan irrelevant. Hopefully, by the time ALE becomes a major thing on HF radio, we don't need bands, we don't need frequencies, we just need a time of day to turn it on. That's how ALE works. ALE is going to be able to choose the frequency that best works to make the communication happen. So getting that time period nailed down now is going to be helpful for when ALE becomes a much more common thing in the future. So again, the data bridges are all about efficiency, making sure that people are in the right place at the right time with the right antenna on the right frequency to make these communications more likely to happen. Again, if you've got enough power, this is all irrelevant. If you've got enough power, you can just blast out any time of day you want and make these comms happen. But again, we're working with the lowest common denominator. It does not matter if you've got $100,000 worth of gear in your ham shack if you cannot communicate with the masses. So we're trying to keep the masses in mind, people who don't have thousands of dollars to spend on HF radio stuff. Maybe they can afford a $65 transceiver, right? So we're trying to keep those folks in mind. And this comm plan is duplicated for Europe and for Australia. So we've got basically the same thing. If you're in Europe, this is the card you use. And again, here are your data bridges. Same thing with Australia. This is what you guys have got. And the same data bridges. Now, of course, the times are changed to be more convenient for the working man, right? We want to keep people who are working standard business hours connected We want to make it so that people can get off work, have some time to themselves, and, casually fire up JS8 call on a Thursday night. That's how we want to make things set up, right? So we've got that set up for Europe and for Australia. Now, again, the Europe group is not going to be talking to the American group, and the American group is not going to be talking to the Australian group, except on, hopefully, Saturdays, when people have a lot more incentive and some free time to make those comm windows happen. For instance, for me at least, if I want to maintain contact with Australia, I've got to get up at like 5 in the morning to make it actually happen. So that's not going to be possible during the week because already up and about doing other stuff. But on a Saturday, that might be possible if you want. So, for me, again, for Europe, the comm window for Europe is going to be, for me, tuning in at around, I think, 2 in the afternoon. So I can't do that during the week, but, during a weekend, that's going to be possible. So that's one of the main reasons for separating out these data bridges. It's because if you want to have the best chance of success at hitting a different continent, you've got to get up really early or stay up really late a lot of times to make these comms happen. So you want to have your difficult shots to be made on the weekend where you can take a nap or something and you can work around it. You're not held down to a standard work day. Up next, we've got a slightly different card, which is talking about basic incident response. A lot of people these days want to know what to do. They want some kind of SOP, standard operating procedure, right? And this is kind of our quick stab at it from a communications perspective. Basically, something happens in the world, something significant that is going to affect you personally. Maybe not for your local area, but for maybe a region or something like that. You can pick up this card and know what to do. So basically, this is just a quick reminder for, taking care of your physical security first, then start establishing communications, determine who's on the network, who's on GhostNet, who's going to be talking and working this issue. Start putting together a talk and working through, various staff functions. Then, of course, keeping in mind how the situation is going to change. We can't always drop everything we're doing to track some world event. So keeping that in mind, and then, what to do afterwards to improve your incident response through GhostNet for next time. And then on the back of that card are just a reminder of all of the intelligence collection methods that you can use. SIGINT, IMINT, COMINT, MASINT, HUMINT, and OSINT. All the different tools you can have to improve your intelligence collection capability. Just a quick little reminder. Up next, we've got kind of a placeholder. I've got a world time zone chart, which I'm going to replace with a map that I'm making myself. And on the back of that, we've got kind of a platform overview explaining kind of like the pros and cons of things like JS8 Call, Ion2G, WinLink, and Meshtastic. Now, as many of you noted, Meshtastic is not part of this plan yet. But it will be. I'm working on making that happen. We've just got to do a little bit more testing before we dive back into Meshtastic. I know a lot of people think Meshtastic is dead. Far from it. Meshtastic has come leaps and bounds since we talked about it a couple of years ago. So there's going to be more to come on that very, very soon. Up next, we have a document detailing how to set up Ion2G and configure things. Just a quick reminder guide. Ion2G is not the easiest thing to learn as a beginner. It's leaps and bounds better than anything that was out there prior, but Ion2G is still a little bit complicated for beginners to use. So this is just kind of a quick guide to remind you as to how to set it up. And then on the back are the frequency list for the GhostNet. I'm tempted to say ignore this for now because we're still working on the frequencies. This document should have to go with it the config file so that you could load the configuration right into Ion2G and you wouldn't have to manually put any of these in. I'm still working on it, so these frequencies are probably going to change. So yeah, don't pay too much attention to this for now. And then moving on to what I know a lot of people are going to have questions on: receive only options. So this is just a very quick reference guide, kind of a reminder for people who might want to be setting up a receive only setup. Again, this is going to have its own dedicated video, just like we have already done with setting up listen only JS8 call. And then finally, on the last page here, we have a very crude last ditch receive only options thing. Basically, if all you've got is a simple shortwave receiver, here's what you can listen to, and here are the best practices to get the most out of it during a crisis. Yeah, I'm going to be expanding this quite a bit. This is going to be changed quite a bit. Again, this is a working product. This is a working document, and this is what you get when you're releasing something that is not exactly finished. There's going to be a lot of changes. So this is the plan as it stands now. Keeping all of this in mind, now that we've kind of gone over the dirty details of this, let's talk about some of the downsides, some of the cons to this program, to this plan here. For one, it's nothing new. It's basically just a plan to use pre-established software. This isn't really a con, I guess, but if you're expecting this to be some magical high-tech system, you're going to be disappointed. At its core, GhostNet is simply a predetermined set of frequencies and times of day which increase the potential for people to actually communicate and not just randomly blast out transmissions to whoever's out there. Another con, like I've mentioned before, is that since this is on HF for the most part, you're going to need a license. As long as the FCC exists, this is going to be a concern. However, the system will function in an emergency just fine. There are no hardware locks that prevent unlicensed users from transmitting. Of course, we are required by FCC regulations to mention that unlicensed transmissions are against FCC regulations. So I begrudgingly have to put this disclaimer in there. But if the FCC no longer exists, anybody with an appropriate radio can easily transition to this system. Another con is that for now, a lot of people are going to be left out. With data bridges connecting large population centers, individual users who fall between regions are bound to feel left out until we can specify more regions, more data bridges. But fear not, if you don't fall exactly within a region, you can tune into the closest one for you. Another con is that with the many different plans, things can get pretty confusing. Hopefully we can mitigate this by creating a guide like we have so far that's going to allow users to simply pick the region they live in and go from there. On each card there are clear instructions for communicating within the region as well as other regions around the world. A major con that I've kind of talked about already is that there are no VHF or UHF options. Only catering to the HF radio crowd is very limiting. I understand this. The ham radio community is pretty small to begin with, and the people on HF radio is even smaller. It requires a higher level license, and the equipment is really expensive. So a lot of people get priced out or limited if they just got their tech license. Like I mentioned before, do not worry. We are thinking about a more universal plan for VHF and UHF as well. A more universal plan it's going to be really hard to do for VHF and UHF because it really needs to be made at a local level based on the local topography and what people have in a local area, which is why I'm hesitant to do it, and I certainly don't want to include it in the GhostNet, which is more strategic. I mean, it would take a long time and actually be, I think, quite limiting, because then we'd have thousands of different comm plans. I mean, even if I were to do one for each state, that's still 50 different comm plans we've got to track and maintain eyes on. So for now, I think we're just going to have to stick with more strategic communications for the GhostNet, and we'll come back to VHF and UHF in a bit. Another con that people might mention is there are no voice modes that are standard, right? It doesn't include voice. This is really just a data-only thing. I understand that voice nets are extremely common, and people who enjoy longer conversations are not likely to enjoy the GhostNet too much. But we have to keep in mind, like I mentioned already, that this is not for rag chewing. This is a tool. And even though it's a bit more difficult and it requires, having a computer, digital modes are the future of radio. There's a reason why so many of our fellow ham radio content creators have focused on digital modes quite a lot. It's not just the new hotness. Digital modes like FT8, JS8, VAR-AC, or even WinLink and Ion 2G, these tools are here to stay because they are efficient and fast. Of course, we don't want to put all of our eggs in one basket and just do only digital stuff. We want to allow for standard, SSB voice, and even stuff like CW. We want to allow for these valuable tools because of how universal they are. I don't want to be banging out CW every day to spread news stories around, but I do want to practice it occasionally and definitely have it in an emergency. I bet a lot of you feel the same way about your favorite radio mode, so we want to provide that opportunity for those that want it. Another con that I briefly mentioned earlier is that content from us and me directly is going to be very difficult to do. So you're not going to hear anything directly from me on it for now. With privacy a major concern for myself and others, it would not be a swell idea for me to link my official real-world name to the S2 project. However, we still have to play by the FCC's rules, so a security by obscurity approach is really all we've got. So my own transmissions, when I'm on it myself, using my real name and stuff like that, my transmissions will simply blend in with all of you. This means that I can't tell you to tune in to X frequency at a certain time and hear me read the news. I can't do that unless an event occurs that's so bad that the FCC and all sad hams no longer are a factor, which is extremely unlikely to ever happen. I desperately want to one day be able to say, buy this radio, download this comm plan, and you'll be able to hear me no matter what. I want to start putting out wire reports in the same way, but we have to start with baby steps while we're thinking about how to make this happen. And one of the best baby steps we can offer is simply a time and place for many of us to link up, chat for a bit, test our gear, check our antennas and stuff, and if we have the desire to, exchange information here and there. This may sound simple, but it's a little bit complicated because there is, again, no net control. There's no one person in charge, no single point of failure, and no single point of intelligence collection. It's going to be way more disorganized this way, I know. This is probably going to be the only ham radio network that doesn't have a net control. But this ensures the survivability of the network. You can't cut the head off the snake if the snake has no head to begin with, right? When creating a long-term communications plan, we have to account for the net being able to continue even if we are not able to participate. I'm not going to live forever, so I would hope that in the event of my unexpected absence, the GhostNet can continue, or at least be a good first step towards maintaining comms should the worst happen. In a slightly more likely scenario, since the GhostNet is going to be comprised of many comm plans all taking place at multiple times of day, I can't dedicate 8 hours of my life to sitting on JS8 call, but I can hit my local network and maybe an overseas data bridge once a week. So in my personal absence, if I'm not there, the net is already there for people to use if they want. Over time, I'm sure we'll all get a bit more acquainted on certain comm plans, and as time goes on, we can start sharing responsibilities for more complex projects. And that's really what this is all about. The GhostNet is at minimum a simple communications plan, but it's also a way for us to grow together, learn from each other, and honestly get a little bit of reassurance. I know it may sound a bit silly, but whenever I turn on JS8 call and I see that GhostNet tag, I know that there's somebody else out there in the real world that is on the same page as me. It's one thing to talk to someone on the internet, but when you are able to do something physical with your hands and see the benefit of your work, it's really motivating. Because when you see that GhostNet tag, you know that whatever happens, somebody will always be there, ready to fight in the shade together.